Today, I'm going to share 3 progressively more disturbing stories, and at the end of each of them, I will reveal the picture or pictures that are famously associated with that story. But before I get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please RSVP as single to the like button's wedding, and then show up with a +1. Also subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. Alright, let's get into today's stories. Soon after the Beatles dissolved in 1969, one of the 4 members, John Lennon, left his native England and moved to New York City. Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono took up residence in the Dakota, which is a very famous building that typically houses the rich and famous people of New York. As soon as Lennon moved to New York, he said that he felt relieved because he didn't have to worry about going outside and getting mobbed by a massive crowd of people that were obsessed with the Beatles. There were people that were huge Beatles fans in New York, but they seemed more respectful, and they would ask for his autograph, but they would mostly leave him alone. Mark David Chapman had always been a massive fan of the Beatles, with a particular interest in John Lennon. But after a 1966 interview where John Lennon, kind of off the cuff, said that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus, this soured Chapman's adoration of Lennon. One of Chapman's high school friends recalls around this time frame Chapman rewriting the song Imagine by John Lennon to read, "Imagine if John Lennon was dead." Chapman started referring to Lennon as a poser and said that he espoused virtues and ideals that he himself did not practice. And so in relative short order, following that 1966 interview, Chapman went from this adoring fan of the Beatles and John Lennon to really solely hating John Lennon and everything he stood for. By 1980, it's safe to say Mark Chapman had become obsessed with John Lennon. Specifically, he had become obsessed with hating John Lennon. In October of 1980, Chapman quits his job as a security guard and flies to New York City. For 2 months, he stayed in the city and didn't really do much of anything. He would just periodically walk past the Dakota where John Lennon supposedly was living, but beyond that, he really didn't do anything in the city. But that would all change on December 8th, 1980. On that day, Chapman went to the Dakota, and he stood right outside the entrance to this building and just waited in hopes that he might run into John Lennon. At 5 p.m. that day, John Lennon comes out with his wife Yoko Ono, and they walk right past Mark Chapman, who flags them down, and he asks John if he can have his autograph. And John Lennon, even though he has a limousine waiting for him, and there's people that are starting to notice that, oh, that's John Lennon, people are coming over, John still took the time to sign an autograph for Mark Chapman. He was very friendly with Mark and asked him if this is enough, do you want anything else? And Mark said, no, that's it, that's fine. And John Lennon said, okay, take care. And John and his wife Yoko Ono turned and went into the limousine and they drove away. When the couple got back to the Dakota that night, Mark Chapman had not left. John Lennon and Yoko Ono get out of their vehicle and they walk past Mark Chapman, who's standing right outside the front door. It's unclear if Mark and John had any interaction, but as soon as they passed Mark and were making their way into the building, Mark Chapman drew a gun and shot John Lennon 4 times in the back. And John Lennon staggers into the lobby screaming, I'm shot, before collapsing and dying. And Mark Chapman, he knew what he was doing. He just stood there, put the gun back in his pocket, and just waited to be arrested. Chapman's lawyers wanted him to plead insanity, but he refused and instead said, I was totally sane, I knew what I was doing, I chose to shoot John Lennon, and I plead guilty. And he was given 20 years to life in jail. And while he was in jail, he would admit that the only reason he did that was to become famous. That was it. This is the picture of Mark Chapman getting that autograph from John Lennon in front of the Dakota just hours before he would gun him down. He's still in jail today, and he actually just had his 11th parole hearing last month in August of 2020, and it was denied. On July 17, 2014, people at Amsterdam's bustling international airport began boarding Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 that was bound for Kuala Lumpur. The 283 passengers on board were from all over the world. Some were traveling for vacation, some were going home, others were just traveling for business. In addition to the 283 passengers, there were also 15 crew members that rounded out the flight to a total of 298 people on board MH17. One of the passengers, before walking down the runway to get on the flight, took a picture of the plane itself and uploaded it to Facebook and kind of jokingly captioned it, "If we go missing, this is what it looks like," in reference to another Malaysian Airlines flight, Flight 370, that had actually gone missing just a couple of months earlier. Once the boarding was complete on MH17, one of the passengers on board uploaded to Instagram a short video of passengers stuffing their luggage into bins and the captain coming over the intercom saying that, boarding is complete and it's time to turn off your cell phones as we prepare for takeoff. A 15-year-old Dutch boy named Gary Slock and his mother Petra had just sat down inside the plane and they could barely contain their excitement. The pair had signed up for what they were calling a vacation of a lifetime with a group that took single parents and their children on these lavish vacations. Gary, who was the goalkeeper for his soccer team, had been telling his family how jealous his teammates were of this trip he was about to go on with his mother. Before Gary turned off his phone, as instructed by the captain, he took a selfie of he and his mom grinning ear to ear, excited about their trip, and he uploaded it to Facebook for his friends and family to see. Gary turns off his cell phone, puts it away, and he and his mom sit back and get ready for takeoff. The plane takes off without a hitch, it gets up to cruising altitude, and it's going to be a long flight. It's about 12 hours from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, and so everybody on board's kind of settling in. They're getting their iPads out, they're getting a book out maybe. The crew is making their rounds, offering snacks and drinks, and people are looking out the window. It's a beautiful day, and everyone's just kind of settling in for a long flight. About 3 hours after takeoff, around 4 p.m., the captain of MH17 got in touch with air traffic control at the nearby airport, which was in Ukraine. The pilot told controllers that everything was fine. He was flight level, 33,000 feet. The controllers acknowledged that and said, hey, there's a little bit of air traffic in the direction you're going. You need to reroute your course very slightly. The pilot acknowledged this change in course and was beginning to tell them what he was going to do next when he cut out. The controllers on the ground in Ukraine began hailing MH17 to try to get the captain back online. They couldn't reach him. The plane had sent no distress signals, and over the course of their communication, the controllers had not noticed anything abnormal. And so this sudden radio silence really didn't make any sense. Yelena Brichenko was a 20-year-old bank teller living in Ukraine who happened to be looking up right as MH17 was flying overhead. She would later say that what she saw would haunt her for the rest of her life. As she was watching, MH17 just explodes, and the people inside of the plane very clearly get ejected out of the plane. And she's watching as these people and bits of plane are falling from 33,000 feet, and they come crashing down in this huge fiery inferno. The theory, backed by US intelligence, was that pro-Russian separatists could have fired a missile at this plane thinking it was Ukrainian military. It was not. It was just civilians. All 298 people on board MH17 perished, including Gary and Petra. This is the selfie that Gary took moments before takeoff with his mother as they were excited about their vacation. Family and friends that saw this picture on Facebook would say that this image perfectly captures Gary's wonderful personality and the love that Gary and Petra had for each other. From the outside, Bart Whitaker appeared to love his family. He and his younger brother Kevin were extremely close, and Bart and his father shared a passion for long-distance cycling and would often go out and bike around the neighborhood together. Bart's family would regularly go on vacation to places like Cancun, and the pictures of Bart with his family on these vacations are always him beaming with happiness and love for his family. On December 10th, 2003, Bart, who was 23, almost 24 years old at the time, made a special announcement to his family. He told his family that he had just finished taking his final exams of his senior year at nearby Sam Houston State College and that he was going to graduate. Bart was not a natural student and frankly struggled in college, and so this was a really big announcement, and the family was really excited for him, especially his parents. And so they said, we have to go out and celebrate. And so they went out to a restaurant, they're having this really expensive, lavish dinner, and in fact, his parents had bought a really nice Rolex watch to give to Bart if he were to graduate college. And so here he is announcing it, and they thought, you know what, now's a good time to give it to him. They give him his Rolex, and they're asking people at nearby tables to take their pictures, and everybody just seems so happy, and the parents are so proud of Bart. After they finish dinner, they're all smiles, they pile back in the family car, and they start making their drive back to Sugar Land, Texas, where the Whitaker residence was. It was inside of this upper-class suburb about 40 minutes away from Houston, Texas. On the drive home, his parents are endlessly talking about how proud they are of Bart and how excited they are for his future. They get back to their house, they pull in the driveway, and Bart's brother and parents make their way up to the front door. Bart is behind them and he says, "Hey, I forgot something in the car." He turns around and goes back to the car as his brother and his parents walk into the house and are immediately gunned down by an assassin waiting inside of the Whitaker residence. Bart hears the shooting and runs back inside the house. He sees his family is down. He ends up wrestling with the shooter, who ends up shooting him but hits him in the arm before escaping the house. A neighbor hears the shooting and runs outside and sees this chaotic scene. They call 911. Police show up and Bart's brother, Kevin, has passed away, as well as his mother. They both died on scene. As for Bart and Bart's father, they would go to the hospital and they would both make a full recovery. So this huge investigation is launched to figure out who this assassin was and why he was attacking the Whitaker family, and quickly they discovered that Bart Whitaker had hired him. Bart Whitaker wanted his family killed so he could take their money, and he had the assassin shoot him in the arm to make it look like, this was not his fault and he wasn't involved. Here's a picture from the night they were out celebrating Bart's big accomplishment that he had finished his final exams, except Bart was a total liar and he had stopped going to classes ages ago. He was failing every class and was not even close to graduating. In this picture, Bart knows that the assassin he hired is currently sitting in their house, waiting for them to return when he is going to open fire and kill Bart's family. The people in this picture with him are going to be murdered literally hours later. He knows it. Bart was convicted in 2007 for hiring the hitman and was given the death penalty, but 40 minutes before his execution, the governor of Texas commuted his sentence to a life sentence because, oddly enough, Bart's own father, one of the people he tried to have killed, had forgiven him and did not want to see his last remaining family member be executed. So that's going to do it, guys. Let me know in the comments what you thought of these 3 stories, and I will pin the best comment at the top of the comments section. And if you haven't done this already, please RSVP as single to the Like Button's wedding, but then show up with a +1. Also subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username on both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit. It's just called Mr. Ballen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, guys, that's going to do it. See ya. I think we all tend to believe that everywhere in the world is accessible if I just had the time, the money, or maybe both. But today, I'm going to shatter that illusion and share with you a top 3 list of places you can't go, no matter how much time or money you may have. And for each of these locations, I'll share with you an instance of people going there anyways and what happened to them. Spoiler, it didn't end well. But before we get into today's top 3 list, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. If that's of interest to you, please throw the like button into the devil's kettle in Minnesota, and then subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. There is this tiny, lush, heavily forested, beautiful island 93 miles off the coast of Brazil that no matter how beautiful it looks, no one will go to this island. In fact, you're not allowed to go to it because the Brazilian Navy has forbidden it. So the legend of this island really began in the early 1900s when a local fisherman was off the coast of the island and saw right on the edge of the forest were these beautiful banana trees with all these bananas that were ripe and ready to be picked. And he thought, I can easily pull my boat over to those rocks over there, hop out, grab some bananas and bring them home, no problem. That'll take me, 10 minutes to do. And so he pulls over by himself to get these bananas. He anchors his boat. He walks up the beach. He climbs up the tree and he starts hacking down some bananas. And while he's up there, he suddenly feels a sharp pain on his rib cage. And he falls out of the tree and he looks down and he's bleeding out of his rib cage because he can see it on his shirt. There's blood on his shirt. Was there a branch that jabbed me in the side? Like, what was that? And he's alone. He's 93 miles from the mainland. And so in a panic, he ditches the bananas. He runs to his boat, gets it unanchored, and starts making his way back to the mainland. But on the trek back, he passes out in the boat. Later that day, another group of fishermen see this boat kind of drifting around near some rocks, and it looks like something's wrong, so they make their way over to it, and there's this fisherman who went to get the bananas, but he's lying on his back. He's clearly dead, and he's in a pool of his own blood. 20 years after this incident, there was a lighthouse keeper that was assigned to work on this island, and he brought his family with him. They were staying in the main house of the lighthouse, and it was going fine for the first couple of days they were there. But at some point, captains of vessels that would drive past this island and relied on that lighthouse noticed that the light wasn't on. And so they reported it to the mainland, and a search party was sent out to check on the lighthouse keeper and his family to make sure that they had all their supplies and that they were okay. When they get to the lighthouse, they find the entire family is dead in their bed. And the only clue they had were these puncture marks all over the bodies of these deceased lighthouse keepers and an open window. So what killed these people that went to this island? Technically, they died from a poison that literally melts your organs within 60 minutes of coming in contact with it. But that poison comes from a very famous venomous snake called the golden lancehead viper that only exists on this island. They exist nowhere else in the world. And so this island has been dubbed Snake Island. And since nobody goes to this island, the lancehead viper population has exploded. They are thriving on this island. In fact, researchers say that there's at least 3,000 of these venomous snakes that live on this island, and for every 1 square meter of the island, there is a snake, which means if you're on this island, you are always within 1 meter of something that can kill you. And these snakes aren't just on the ground either, because their primary food source are birds, and so the snakes have begun to live in the trees and catch birds that land in the trees. Meaning, if you happen to be walking on this densely forested island, you'd be surrounded almost 360 degrees by these wickedly venomous snakes that if you are bit, you have 60 minutes to get the antidote. If you don't, you're doomed 100% of the time. Nowadays, the only people that go to this island are the Navy, who replace the batteries in the lighthouse, which is now automated because it's too dangerous to be there. They go once a year to replace those batteries. Researchers occasionally go there, and you have poachers that go to try to catch some of these snakes because they're so rare, they can sell on the black market for 10 to 30,000 US dollars. But many of these poachers that manage to sneak onto the island just get bit by these vipers and die. So there you go, karma. In early 1945, during World War II, the British decided they wanted to take back Ramree Island from the Japanese. Ramree Island is a fairly large, totally flat island off the coast of Burma that was a great staging location to fly air campaigns onto the mainland. So it was a great air base. And the British had actually owned this island, but the Japanese had taken it back from them in 1942. And so here they are in 1945 looking to take it back. So on January 21st, 1945, British and Indian infantry stormed the beaches of Ramree to try to take it back. As soon as they land, they have all this naval artillery support just bombing the crap out of this airbase, and it was just a matter of time before they overwhelmed the remaining Japanese. But the Japanese do not want to surrender, and instead they give up the airbase that they were on, so the British take that back, and the remaining 1,000 Japanese soldiers started retreating to the opposite end of the island, to where there was a much larger battalion of Japanese soldiers that they could meet up with. But the only issue with this particular retreat was they would have to go through 10 miles of mangrove swamp where there's poisonous spiders and insects and deep mud, making it almost impossible to move. But they're determined and they head off into the swamp. But what the Japanese were not ready for is what Ramree Island is famous for: a creature that makes poisonous snakes and spiders and insects look like child's play. And they were walking directly into its den. The British troops decided we're not going to go chasing them into the swamp. And instead what they did is they set up boats, blocking positions outside of the swamp. If any of the Japanese tried to escape, they would be there waiting. And so the only way the Japanese could get out of there would be to go to the absolute other end, 10 miles away, where their Japanese counterparts were. So that night, as the British are just kind of hanging out in their boats staring at the swamp, they start hearing screams coming from inside of the swamp. And it's Japanese soldiers. Then you hear gunfire and then silence. And then it would start all over again, all over this huge swamp. It was just screams, gunfire, silence, screams, gunfire, silence. And the British are watching this like, do we have troops in there? What's going on in there? What was going on in there is defined by the Guinness Book of World Records as the largest massacre of humans caused by animals. And not just any animal, saltwater crocodiles. These massive man-eating crocodiles can weigh up to 1,000 kilograms or 2,200 pounds. They can grow to be 7 meters in length or about 23 feet in length. And National Geographic has labeled these crocodiles as the most likely to eat a human of all animals. And Ramree Island has the largest population of saltwater crocodiles in the world, and they all lived inside of this swamp that the Japanese had gone into. A lot of them were bleeding from the battle they were in, and so they were literally alerting hundreds of saltwater crocodiles to their location. Saltwater crocodiles are notorious night hunters. So what probably happened is the Japanese got inside of this mangrove. The crocodiles were immediately aware of their presence, but they waited until nighttime before they started having a feeding frenzy. And over the course of the night, a number of Japanese soldiers had jumped out the sides of the swamp, exposing themselves to the British. And so about 20 of them were captured, and they said that they were completely surrounded by these crocodiles, that everywhere you looked, there were growling, huge crocodiles eating one person, and as soon as they were done, they would just charge after you and eat you. And at the end of their retreat, when the Japanese did get to the other side of this swamp, only 500 of the 1,000 made it out the other side. And so to this day, people stay far away from Ramree Island because there are so many of these man-eating saltwater crocodiles that have no issue ripping you to shreds. On November 14th, 2018, John Chow hired 2 fishermen to take him out to this little island in the Indian Ocean. The fishermen were not excited about this, not only because it was illegal to take him out to the island, but because the last time some fishermen had gone to this island, they had both died. But the fishermen needed the money, and so they went with John and they drove under the cover of darkness to this island, and they anchored a little ways offshore. The next morning when the sun came up, John asked the fishermen to take him in a little bit closer, but the fishermen refused. So John puts a kayak in the water and he begins paddling into this island. And as he gets close to the actual beach, he sees someone come out of the forest who has their face painted yellow, and they're screeching at the top of their lungs. And John yells out that he's not threatening them, he just wants to come ashore and talk to them. And then a wave of people with yellow painted faces come charging out of the woodline and start firing arrows in his direction. So John, in a panic, turns around and paddles right back out to the fishing boat. Later that day, John tries to make another attempt at landing on this island and communicating with the people that live there. So he takes his kayak and he goes down a little bit farther away from where those people had emerged from the tree line earlier in the day and shot him with arrows. He figured he was a little bit farther out of arrow range this way. He lands his kayak, he gets out, and the same group of people come out farther down the beach where they had been before. They see John. They all start looking at each other and they start screeching and running down the beach towards John. John stands there until they come all the way up to him. They don't shoot him with arrows, but they take his kayak. And they don't really know what to make of him. They're staring at him and they start speaking to each other in a language John doesn't understand. And then at some point, a child pulls his bow and arrow out and fires a bow directly at John. And he was holding a Bible and he stopped the arrow with his Bible. And at that point, John is like, okay, I gotta go. And he jumps in the water and without a kayak has to swim a mile to get back to the fishing boat. The whole time, these people are firing arrows arbitrarily in his direction as he's swimming back out to the boat. And so the next day, on November 16th, he told the fishermen he wanted them to drop him off and he would swim in, and he wanted them to leave and be completely out of sight. The fishermen did not want to do this, but John reassured them that he was going to be just fine. He knew what he was doing, and so the fishermen drop him off and they leave. The next day, when the fishermen come back to collect John, they see these people with painted yellow faces out on the beach dragging his body by a rope. No one knows exactly what happened to John, how they killed him. There's lots of speculation about how it went down, but it's too dangerous for anyone to go back and retrieve his body, and so his body remains at North Sentinel Island. The few hundred people that live on North Sentinel Island that were responsible for killing John Chow, they're referred to as the Sentinelese, and they are unbelievably primitive. They are completely cut off from the modern world. They live a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. They have no conception of agriculture. They haven't even discovered fire yet. They literally have to wait for lightning to strike and then run and collect the embers and try to keep the embers alive. Researchers believe that the Sentinelese are direct descendants from the earliest human ancestors that came out of Africa. And as much as we'd like to learn more about the Sentinelese, we probably won't, because they aggressively resist outside contact. They won't even let the other similarly primitive neighboring island tribes to come on their island. The Sentinelese want only Sentinelese on that island. No one else can be there. If you're not a Sentinelese and you try to go to their island, they'll just kill you. So let me know what you think of these 3 crazy locations, and let me know if you could go to any of these 3 locations, which one would it be and why? The best answer to that question will get pinned at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's story and you haven't done this already, please throw the like button into the Devil's Kettle in Minnesota, and then subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. If you have a story that you think I should cover on this channel, please submit it to our subreddit. It's linked in the description below. It's just called MrBallen. I read it every day, and if I intentionally use your submission, whether it's your personal story or just a suggested story, I will absolutely credit you. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username on both those platforms is the same, JohnBallen416. I also post a ton of content on TikTok where my handle is MrBallen. So whether I see you on Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, guys, that's going to do it. See ya. I think we all like to believe that the whole world is accessible to us if we just had the time or the money, or maybe both. But in today's video, I'm going to shatter that illusion and share with you a top 3 list of places you can't go no matter how much money or time you might have. And for each of these locations, I'll share with you an instance of someone going there anyways and what happened to them. Spoiler, it didn't end well. But before we get into today's top 3 list, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. If that's of interest to you, then please give the like button a one-way ticket to North Sentinel Island. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. In the early 1990s, a man turns on his camera, flips on his light, and starts filming. As the viewer, all we can tell is that he's in this gray hallway. It's very unclear where he is. It does appear to be something that might be underground because everything seems to be concrete. As he's filming, he begins walking down this narrow corridor where there's nothing on the walls or on the ground or anywhere to give away where he is. And so for the first 40 seconds of him just walking down this kind of meandering hallway, it's very uneventful. Then at some point, he aims his camera at what looks like an arrow that's been spray painted on the wall. He looks down at the ground and there's another arrow. He starts to follow the arrows and he's filming each one as he comes across them as he goes farther and farther off of the main hallway. And at some point the arrows bring him to this room, which at first you can't tell what it is. But then as the camera focuses, you see that there is this massive pile of human remains, skeletal remains. The guy filming does not seem alarmed by what he's seeing. In fact, it seems like he came here knowing he might come across this room full of human remains. After staring at this room for a few moments, he doesn't go in, but instead turns and continues following these arrows and strange markings on the wall and the ground as it brings him farther and farther down this other corridor to more rooms with more skeletal remains. And at some point he comes to a full stop and he's looking at one of these rooms and something spooks him. It's unclear what it is, because to this point, he's been very nonchalant about this horrible thing he's looking at. It didn't seem to faze him at all, but something did spook him, because he's standing there, and then all of a sudden he starts sprinting down the hall. Now, it's clear at this point in the video that he is alone down here, or at least he thinks he's alone down here. But he's running as if someone's chasing him. And he just takes off down this hall. The camera is now dropped to his side. He's not even trying to film what's in front of him. You hear his breathing and it's very panicked. And at some point he kind of trips and drops his camera, and the camera comes to rest in this puddle looking right up against the wall. So you don't have a clear view of where this guy is or what's going on. And all you hear is his panicked breathing and his rapid footsteps as he continues to run down the hallway and eventually just disappears, and it's totally silent. And at some point the camera runs out of batteries and it turns off. 10 years later, a group of urban explorers would find this man's camera where he had dropped it 10 years earlier, in one of the scariest places on Earth. Hundreds of feet below the streets of Paris, France, lies one of the world's largest mass graves. It's known as the Paris Catacombs, and it's about 200 miles of intricate passageways that loop all over the city of Paris, where over 6 million people have been buried. The reason all these people were buried down there is because by the 17th century in Paris, the cemeteries in the city were overflowing, and so the decision was made to move their bodies down underneath the streets of Paris into these tunnels that were built in the 13th century for mining but had not been used in hundreds of years. And so they began packing in all these people to the tune of 6 million bodies before they ultimately stopped doing that. Starting in the late 1800s, the catacombs became sort of a popular tourist destination, but only a tiny section of the catacombs was made open to the public, meaning there are literally hundreds of miles of passageways in the catacombs that are totally sealed off to the public. No one goes in there, even though many people believe in these forbidden sections of the catacombs, there are entrances to additional levels of the catacombs, that there could be as much as 400 miles of passageways in the catacombs just waiting to be explored, but no one's allowed to go in there. At least not legally. There is an entire community of people that are sneaking into the forbidden section of the catacombs by going through sewer drains and getting onto train tracks and sneaking into these little cracks in the side of the walls. I mean, it's incredibly dangerous. It involves wriggling your way into these 13th century tunnels that are unmapped, pitch black, and no one knows you're there. Not to mention, you're surrounded by literally millions of dead people. Once people started figuring out how to sneak into the forbidden section of the catacombs, there's been countless stories of these urban explorers sneaking in, getting lost, and never coming out again. Which is exactly what we think happened to the guy with the camera who saw the arrows and then ran away. His camera was located miles and miles into one of those forbidden sections. In 2014, Kenny Veach was an avid long-distance hiker that spent lots of his time hiking around the Mojave Desert in search of caves and abandoned mine shafts to go check out. Sometimes he'd bring his girlfriend with him, but most of the time he was on his own and he would stay out for a couple of days at a time. Kenny was constantly on YouTube watching hiking videos and anything to do with the Mojave Desert. And Kenny was a regular commenter on all of those types of videos. In June of 2014, Kenny must have watched this video called Son of an Area 51 Technician because he had left this comment where he was telling the community that had watched this video that he had had a very strange thing happen to him when he was out hiking near Area 51. For those that don't know what Area 51 is, it's a highly confidential United States Air Force installation that is frequently looped into alien conspiracy theories. Kenny goes on to describe this strange event, and he said he found this cave entrance on the side of this mountain that was shaped like an uppercase M. As Kenny walks up to enter this M-shaped cave, he said his body started to vibrate, and it stopped him in his tracks. And he said he didn't know what it was, but as he walked closer and closer, his body just continued to vibrate to the point where he said he just had to turn around and leave, that he knew something was wrong with this cave and he could not go inside. And so he said he turned around and he left. His comment got a lot of traction on this video, and a lot of people jumped on and were like, well, I don't really believe you, one, but if that is true, you gotta go back. You gotta go back there and explore it. You gotta document this. Whatever this is, we want to know what it is. They were basically egging him on to go back and check it out. Kenny responded to his critics and said, I'm telling you the truth. I know what I saw. This cave was different. I go out in the desert all the time looking for caves, and I go in them. That's what I do. This one was different, and that's why I didn't go in it. But people just kept egging him on to go back and check it out and to film it, show documentation of this thing. And so finally he agrees. A couple of months later, Kenny goes back out to the Mojave Desert with his camera, and he films himself looking for the M cave, but he can't find it. So the video's kind of a bust. He still uploads it to YouTube, and he tells everyone that he's gonna go back out again. He knows where it is. He's fairly confident that he can get to it again, but he just needs to go out a third time to go look for it. Over the course of the next month, in the comment section of that video, people are encouraging Kenny and saying, go out there, go find it, we're so excited. One commenter was not so encouraging. Their name was Lemmy Killmeister, and they wrote on his video, do not go to M Cave. If you go in, you won't be able to get out again. Kenny wrote back, "What do you mean?" And Lemmy Kilmister didn't respond and subsequently vanished from YouTube. Kenny brushes this off, and on November 10th, 2014, he heads back out once again to try to find M Cave. On November 14th, when he had not returned and his girlfriend had not heard from him and couldn't get in touch with him, she called the police. The police launched this massive search for Kenny. They knew roughly where he was going to be because he had documented it so aggressively on his YouTube channel, and so they search in that area, and after about a week they find his cell phone, and it was laying outside of an abandoned mine shaft. Now immediately searchers think, well, he must have fallen into this mine shaft that was almost a vertical mine shaft. He must have fallen in there to his death. So they get a camera and they feed it down into this mine shaft, and there's no one in there. And very clearly, no one had been down this mine shaft in a very long time. Certainly not Kenny. There were no tracks around where his phone was located, so no animal tracks or people tracks. And the phone didn't have blood on it or scratches on it. It was just sitting there with no new information. Beyond the cell phone, they had nothing else to go on, and eventually the search was terminated. Kenny never turned up. He was just gone after that. While it's pretty easy for people to chalk up this whole M Cave thing as total nonsense and that they believe all that happened is Kenny went out into the wilderness of the Mojave Desert and ultimately got lost and died, and that's fair, I do want to offer up one thing about his description of being near the cave, that first time he saw it. He described his body vibrating to the point where he couldn't go any further and he had to turn around and leave. The United States military uses these things called access denial systems around their highly classified installations. Anywhere where you cannot risk someone getting in, like a fence isn't good enough, they use these machines that fire beams at people that get too close. They're non-lethal, but it's like being thrust inside of a microwave. You feel hot and really uncomfortable, and you turn around and you get the heck out of there. The fact that Kenny was right near Area 51, a highly confidential area, regardless of alien conspiracies, it's a known highly confidential base. And he's discovering this strange cave entrance that doesn't look like other cave entrances, and he's walking up to it describing basically what it feels like to be hit with an access denial system. It makes you wonder, did he discover some secret entrance to some secret base? Or is this a bunch of crap and he just got lost in the desert and died? We don't know. But what we do know is that his search for M Cave probably ended his life. And that's why you should never go looking for M Cave. As the sun began to set on August 18th, 2010, Ben McDaniel, who was 30 years old, walked to the end of the pier, put on all of his diving equipment, and jumped in the water. He slowly descended 115 feet and came to a stop right in front of a very famous underwater sign. The sign very clearly tells anybody who sees it, do not go any farther unless you are absolutely certain this is the right thing for you to be doing. If you go farther, you're probably going to die, like the 300 other people that have died doing this particular activity. He swam right past that sign and went 300 feet to the very famous underwater locked gate. Now, the only people that have keys to this are extremely experienced divers, and even they don't typically go into this area because it's so dangerous. Ben was not one of the very experienced divers that was given a key, but he still desperately wanted to get to the other side of the gate. So he's sitting there yanking on the gate, and he's getting himself kind of pushed inside halfway through the gate, and he can't quite get it open. And another diver saw him doing this and was actually concerned that Ben was going to get trapped on the gate itself and would just drown on the gate. And so this diver comes over and uses his key, and maybe against his better judgment opened it, thinking that that was better than him getting stuck on the gate. Ben turns to look at him, gives him a nod, thank you, and he, on his own, swims into one of, if not the single most dangerous underwater caves in the whole world. It's called Vortex Spring Cave. From the locked gate, this cave extends another 1,600 feet and goes down to a depth of 310 feet. The majority of this section of the cave is mapped, but there are sections that are not fully explored because they're so narrow, where you have to literally take off your gear, wriggle through a hole, pull your gear through and put it back on. All the while you're barely holding onto your mouthpiece. And so really the full extent of this section of the cave is not known. While we don't know exactly what Ben did when he went through that gate and entered into this extremely dangerous cave, we do know that he didn't come out again. And after a couple of days and no one had seen him, they launched this massive search for him, and they combed as much as they could of inside of that cave, but there were sections that they were just not prepared to go search. And so he was never recovered. All they ever found were 2 of Ben's dive bottles. As a total side note, when I was reading about the Vortex Spring Cave, it reminded me of some of the things that we did when I was in the Navy SEAL teams. And one of my least favorite things to do is when we would be swimming in and around ships. We would go under barges. And so a barge has a flat bottom. And sometimes they sit really close to the bottom of the ocean, but there's a little space under there where you can maneuver. And so we would go underneath these barges where there was only a few feet of clearance. And it's totally pitch black, and you're swimming in just total blackness where you're so claustrophobic. You're basically tight in this little space where you're just hoping that nothing causes this barge to sink on me. And by the time you get out the other side, it's like this huge sense of relief. And so that's why this is number one on my list, because for me, the idea of being trapped in a little tiny alcove inside of an underwater cave where you can't get out, you're running out of air, it's pitch black. I mean, that is just the absolute worst way to go. That's gonna do it, guys. Let me know in the comments which of these 3 places you might actually want to go check out and why. I'll respond to all the early commenters, and I will pin the best overall comment at the top of the comment section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please purchase the like button, a one-way plane ticket to North Sentinel Island. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username is the same on both platforms. It's JohnBallen416. Also, I have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. I check it every day, and if I intentionally use one of your suggestions, I will absolutely credit you. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, guys, that's going to do it. See ya. For at least 2 centuries, people have been claiming to see this tall, hairy, ape-like creature walking around forests all over the world, but mostly in North America. That creature is commonly referred to as Bigfoot. But despite the thousands of sightings that have occurred over the years and the nearly 400 news sightings of this supposed creature every year, there's never been any scientific proof that the creature actually exists. So while the legitimacy of these first-hand accounts is very much up for debate, and probably will be for some time, what's not up for debate is how absolutely terrifying some of these first-hand accounts are. And so what I did is I went out and found 2 of the most frightening encounters with Bigfoot, and I'm going to share those stories on today's video. But before we get into those 2 stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. If that's of interest to you, I would encourage you to steal the like button's phone and turn off all of their alarms so they're late for work tomorrow. Also, please subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. In July of 1924, Fred Beck, along with 4 other gold prospectors, stumbled out of a forest right near Mount St. Helens in Washington state. And they swore to each other that they would not tell a soul what they had seen in the mountains the night before. But literally within a few hours of making that promise to each other, one of the men had spilled the beans at a bar. Very quickly, their story would garner major national media attention and even drew some international attention as well. This is their story. So the week leading up to the men arriving back in town with this crazy story, they had been prospecting for gold in an area they were very accustomed to working in. In fact, for the past 6 years, they had been going to this spot. So it was an area they knew well. And so this particular week that they were out there had been really successful. They had found a whole bunch of gold. It was like this great run of luck and nobody wanted to leave. Unfortunately, one of the men, named Fred Beck, started complaining of a really bad toothache. Now, they're about 2 miles away from this town. It's very rugged terrain. It's not safe for someone to travel alone in case something were to happen. And so Fred needed one or all of these men to come back with him. None of them wanted to leave, but they were willing to compromise. And they said, let's stay here today, and then we'll leave first thing tomorrow morning. And so Fred didn't really have much of a choice, and so he agreed, and they spent the rest of the day prospecting for gold. When the sun started to go down, the men decided it was time to pack it in and head to their cabin. Now, because these men had worked in this area for the past 6 years, They had actually built a small log cabin centrally located in this area so they could just crash out there and continue to work and not need to commute out of the town. The cabin, though, was not built for comfort. It was built entirely for practicality. It was barely big enough to sleep all 5 men, and in fact, 2 of them had to sleep in the same bed, like right against one another, and then the other 3 had to sleep on the ground. There were no windows in this cabin. It was like this awful chamber that they were trapped inside of, but it was sturdy, it protected them from the elements, and it was enough because they were out there for work, not for pleasure. So as they're walking towards their tiny little cabin, they get just outside the cabin and notice a very large footprint, like an animal print, outside the cabin. The men stop, they look down. Now, these are 5 rugged mountain men that are accustomed to being out in the wild. They've had their fair share of run-ins with large predators, and so they quickly said, oh, that's a bear print. But upon closer inspection, as they're looking at this print, they noticed it was 19 inches long. That's way too big to be a bear print. And so they start speculating about what type of animal could make that print. As they're speculating, one of the men brings up that over the course of the week when he had been away from the group, a little ways away from the cabin, he had noticed a similar, not nearly as big, but a similar print. And when he had bent down to look at the print and inspect it to see what it was, he said he heard a whistling sound coming from the forest that was right next to him. And so he stood up and looked, but he didn't see where the whistling was coming from. And he thought to himself, I don't know what animal makes that sound. So he's looking out, he can't see where the whistling's coming from, and then he hears whistling behind him. The same sound, but on the opposite side of him. And he turns around and he looks, and there's nothing over there as well. And he's trying to put together in his head what animal makes that sound. He knows it's not the people he's out there with because they were way over near the cabin and he could actually see them from where he was. And he starts getting this really uneasy feeling that whatever made this huge print is probably in the woods right now watching me, whistling at me. And so he abandons the print and heads back to camp, but was too embarrassed to bring the story up to the group in fear that they would think he was exaggerating, so he never brought it up. When this guy tells this story to the group, Fred Beck would say, "That's weird, I heard whistling coming from the forest too. I thought it was you guys." They figured they were dealing with a large predator. They decide that it's in their best interest to forego a campfire outside the cabin, which they normally would do at night, and instead just go right inside the cabin and shut the door because they don't know what animals are out here and they want to play it safe. So they're sitting inside their windowless little dark cabin and they start feeling pretty hungry. And they decide they want to boil some water to make food, but they don't have any water. Normally, when any of these guys went out to fetch water, they would go by themselves. The spring was not very far away from their cabin. They'd just walk out, scoop some water up, and come back. But because they were all feeling pretty uneasy, and they didn't know what this big animal was that was in their general vicinity, Fred, along with one of the other men, whose name was Hank, decide to go together, and to bring their rifles just in case. Fred and Hank begin walking over to the stream that was only about 100 meters away from where they were. The moon was out, so there was a little bit of light coming from that, but it was mostly dark. And they're walking over to this stream. Then all of a sudden, Hank stops and raises his rifle up at the side of this embankment that was totally forested all the way up the side of the valley. Fred looks where Hank is aiming, and immediately he can tell what he's looking at. Standing a couple hundred meters up this mountain is this creature that's very tall, standing on 2 legs. It appears to be hairy, that's poking its head around a tree and it's looking at them. They could only see it because the moon was casting light directly on it, so it was totally illuminated. As soon as Fred recognizes what they're looking at, the creature ducks back behind the tree. At the same time, Hank fires 3 shots in its general direction, and then there's silence. And then all of a sudden it comes barreling out from behind the tree and is running straight down the mountain towards them while whistling over its shoulder, looking like it's communicating with something behind it. Hank starts firing in its direction. It's clearly not striking this creature, but at some point the creature disappears. They don't know where it went. It's dark out. The only way they could see it before was because the moonlight happened to illuminate it. Now they don't know where it is. Fred and Hank abandon the water idea and they run right back to the cabin. They jump inside, shut the door, and they start barricading the door shut. The other men are like, what the heck is going on? And they start explaining what happened. They didn't know if it was a person or if it was this creature. They heard that whistling sound. All the guys are spooked. And now they're barricaded inside of this tiny cabin. And it's totally dark. There's no windows, so they can't even see what's going on outside of the cabin. And so they just had to sit there and hope that this creature does not come anywhere near them. After a long period of total silence, the men start to feel like, okay, whatever that was, it's not coming back. It's late at night. Let's just try to get some sleep. And so the men all lay down and eventually doze off to sleep. Then at some point in the middle of the night, something smashes into the side of the cabin, causing them all to wake up. Hank's yelling out because a piece of wood that actually made up the cabin had come loose from whatever had hit the side of the cabin and fallen onto him. So the group gets up. There's a little bit of light coming through this now, a little crack in the wall from where this wood plank came out. They can see what's happening now. There's a little bit of light inside. They run over, they get this plank off of Hank, and as they're trying to kind of make sense of this chaotic moment, they start hearing what sounds like lots of people running around the outside of their cabin. Hank, who was closest to this little slat that had been created from one of the planks falling out, just turns his head to look out the slat. Because of the moon, there was a little bit of illumination, and when he looked out, he was horrified because he saw 3 creatures, these tall, ape-like creatures, the same one that Fred and Hank had been shooting at up over at the valley before. They're standing 10-15 meters away from the cabin, standing upright, looking at the cabin. They're holding these small boulders in their hands. And as Hank is looking through the slat, he's trying to get a little bit closer to get a better look. One of the creatures bends down and sees that Hank is looking at him, and he winds up and he throws the boulder and it smashes against this little slat. Hank basically falls over because he's trying to avoid this boulder being thrown at him, but the slat was small enough that it didn't go through. Hank's telling the rest of the men that there's 3 of them. There's 3 of them. They're right there. The men are grabbing their rifles. They're getting ready to aim out of the slat to try to take a shot at one of these creatures. But by the time they have a sight picture, there's no one out there, except they hear these footsteps and they start hearing whistling coming from the other sides of the cabin where they have no way of seeing what's going on because there's no windows and that gap in the cabin was only facing one way. And so they just sit there in silence as they hear all this whistling and footsteps and shuffling happening outside of their cabin. Then all of a sudden they hear slamming against the one door that leads into the cabin. They had barricaded the door already, so they go up and they're pressing back against the barricade as whatever is outside is trying to break into the cabin, but it can't get through the barricade. When they couldn't break in the front door, there was a barrage of these boulders smashing into the cabin. Now, these men had built the cabin. They knew it was sturdy, but they didn't know if it could withstand boulders hitting it. And so for hours, these rocks and boulders are smashing into the cabin. They never see them again through that slat. They kept periodically looking and there was never any creatures that were on that side. It was like the creatures knew that they could be seen on that side but couldn't be seen elsewhere. Finally, it just stops and they sit down in the middle of the cabin. Fred was sitting in such a way that he could actually see the slat in the cabin that was now open and exposed. And as he's sitting there, Fred is horrified when he sees a hand slide into the cabin. A hairy, big ape hand that reaches in and starts fumbling around, grabs hold of an axe that was leaning up against the inside of the cabin. And as it's getting ready to pull it out, Fred runs over and twists the axe so it won't slide through the slat. And so the creature's slamming the axe, trying to get it out at the same time that Hank takes a shot and shoots right through the slat. The creature releases it and runs away. They hear all this whistling very close to their cabin, which made them realize that they had just been quietly waiting outside of their cabin. They had never left. But after Hank had taken that shot at the thing's hand, it sounded like almost a stampede was running away off into the forest. And at that point, the group was fairly certain that it was done. The next morning, when they saw through that slat in their cabin that the sun had finally come up, the men packed only the bare necessities. They got their weapons. When they finally opened up that door, all over the ground, all around the cabin were these rocks that clearly had been thrown at the cabin. The cabin itself had obviously withstood the barrage, but there was gash marks and slashes all over it. Feeling very lucky, the men start making their way out of the valley and they make their way all the way back to town. And after the story kind of went viral, loads of people went out there to try to find these creatures, but no one ever could. In December of 1981, Mike Woolley decided he wanted to go deer hunting in his hometown in Louisiana. It was a cold day, it was great conditions for a hunt, and Mike had a deer stand that was set up about 1.5 miles down this old logging road that no one really used. He would take his truck and he would drive about halfway down that road, and then he'd get out and he would walk the remaining, half mile, 3/4 of a mile to his deer stand, because if he drove his truck in, he would scare away all the deer. He made it to his deer stand by about 3 p.m. that day, and he'd only been there for about 30 minutes when all of a sudden this young doe comes running across and stops right in front of his deer stand. The doe lays down and is clearly exhausted, and Mike would say that it looked like something was chasing it, and he assumed it was some huge buck. And so Mike's getting ready for this big buck to emerge when out of the corner of his eye, he sees something pretty big jump out of a tree. And he kind of turns his head and looks, and it's not a buck. It looked like a gorilla. He thought, okay, a gorilla must have gotten out of the zoo. But then he's thinking to himself, there isn't a zoo around here, and there's no circus around here, so it can't be an escaped gorilla. And then he was like, okay, someone must have put on a gorilla suit to stop me from deer hunting. They're out here to try to get me to leave this spot. They're anti-deer hunting, and so they're here to screw with me. And so Mike, believing that was the case, he starts yelling to them, take off your mask. This isn't okay. This isn't funny. I have a license to be here. You can't be here. You need to leave. Get out of here. And so this thing that he believes is a person wearing a gorilla suit just completely does not react. It's just standing looking at him. And it's about 15 or 20 meters away from him at this time, and it's just staring at him. It's on 2 legs. Mike starts to feel uneasy because he's thinking to himself, if this is somebody in a gorilla suit that's trying to get me to leave, wouldn't they right now announce that and say, you need to leave? They wouldn't just stand there doing nothing. And so Mike, even though he knew it was going to probably escalate the situation, raises up his rifle in the direction of this person to use his scope to basically zoom in on this person and get a better look. And when he raises his rifle and he zooms in, he immediately knows that this is not a person wearing a mask. Steam was coming off of its face like it had been running. It was 30 degrees outside. And he said he could see its nostrils flaring like it was out of breath, or that perhaps it was angry. He didn't know. Even though it wasn't a person wearing a mask, it looked very human-like because it had human teeth, flat teeth. It had, he said, human eyelashes. And just the general structure of its face appeared to be human. And he thought to himself, is this a feral human? Is that possible? Is this a person that has been born and raised in the wild? And so as he's pointing the weapon at this creature, looking through the scope, just totally dumbfounded, Mike has no intention of shooting at this point. He really just wanted to stare at it. The creature roars, and Mike describes it as like a lion's roar. This thing was suddenly really upset with Mike. And Mike believed later on that it was because he raised his weapon at this thing. As soon as it roars, Mike said that about 100 meters in the other direction, he hears this really loud, piercing whistle coming through the forest. As soon as that whistle comes through the forest, the creature that was still growling stops and turns its head in the direction of this whistle. And it whistles back. And so Mike, the hair on the back of his neck is standing up. He knows they're communicating, probably about him. And as he's realizing this, he lowers his weapon and he's looking at the creature in front of him who's whistling and looking in the direction of this way. And then that creature snaps back and looks right at Mike. And as he's wondering what he should do next, another creature walks out of the tree line and stands right next to the first creature. And the way it walked, it was walking like a human. It was on 2 legs. And they're both standing about 20 meters away looking directly at Mike. Mike is terrified. And he would say that he knew that he had to make a run for it. And so he leaps from his stand and starts running towards his truck, which is about a half mile away. And he said as soon as he did, he could tell that one of them at least started sprinting after him. And he looked over his shoulder as he's running towards the logging road, and he sees that one of the creatures is running parallel to him, easily running as fast as he is. It's choosing to stay, 5-10 meters away from him, but running in step with him the whole way. It's like it's forcing him to leave the forest. And so Mike is running, waiting to get attacked by this creature. He finally gets to his truck, he clambers inside and shuts the doors, and he looks out of his window and he sees the creature just standing there looking at him from the trees. He looks in his rear view and he sees that the other creature had also been running after him on the logging road, that the 2 of them had basically herded him to his car. It was an intelligent move. Mike believes that because he raised his weapon at that first creature, that triggered a series of events that led to them chasing him out of the woods. He said that he was the aggressor, not the other way around. We don't know if either of those stories are true, but certainly they are terrifying. So I'd love to get your reaction to these 2 stories in the comments. Are these total fabrications, or is there some truth to Bigfoot? And these stories are just evidence of that. If you enjoyed today's story and you want to hear more like it, I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to steal the like button's phone and turn off all their alarms so they're late for work tomorrow. Also, subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly 3, 4, even 5 video uploads. If you have a story suggestion, drop it into our subreddit called MrBallen. It's linked below in the description. If I intentionally use one of your story suggestions, I will absolutely credit you. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram. My username is johnballen416. I'm also very active on TikTok, where my handle is MrBallen. So whether I see you on Reddit, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, or some combination, I just really appreciate your support. And until next time, guys, that's going to do it. See ya.